In this session, learners will apply instructional practices to access the digital generation's transfluent tendencies and their desire for learning that is simultaneously relevant, engaging, active, instantly useful, and fun by searching and sharing teaching, learning, and assessment strategies by creating portfolio entries. Digital learners are digitally transfluent. Many educators are digitally literate. There's a difference between literacy and fluency. Many educators, including young teachers, continue to struggle with the place and purpose of digital technologies in the classroom. Many of the digital generation are transfluent, meaning their visual spatial skills have become so highly developed that many have cultivated a complete physical and mental interface between the digital and real worlds. Many members of the digital generations are completely comfortable using a wide range of media, and they are able to seamlessly shift from one world to the other. Many of the digital generations have completely internalized the use of digital tools and thus take them for granted. The internet is a natural space for them. It's fully integrated and commonplace in their world. For them, the new digital landscape does not exist in isolation from the physical world. In fact, it's so much a part of their lives that many of the digital generations actually live a hybrid existence. A hybrid existence that seamlessly integrates communication, information, and entertainment with social media to create a world that many of the older generations struggle to understand. Let me show you what I mean. On May 21st, 2014, Michael Jackson appeared on the Billboard Music Awards show to sing his new song, Slave to the Music. What made his performance highly unusual is that it took place almost 5 years after he died in June of 2009. What the audience saw was a virtual representation of Jackson. And here's the amazing part. Many in the audience wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between the real and the virtual Michael Jackson had they not known he was deceased. For those in attendance, the digital landscape didn't exist in isolation from the physical. This is exactly what we are referring to when we write about digital culture and the connection between the digital world and the real world. Imagine if instead of Michael Jackson, the hologram was Albert Einstein talking about black holes, or Nelson Mandela describing how to help a nation overcome apartheid, or Neil Armstrong discussing his historic landing on the moon. The possibilities are unlimited. To the digital generations, their devices are transparent, they are second nature, and thus taken for granted. Although the digital generations covet their smartphones and tablets, they don't think about them. The devices are just a means to an end, not an end in itself. No one gets excited over using a welder, but its ability to connect different pieces together to create something unique and useful from raw material is where its value as a tool really shines. The digital generations use their tools to create seamless gateways between real and virtual worlds. They create unique and useful solutions to real-world problems by transforming raw information into new knowledge that they connect to existing knowledge. This is the definition of transfluency. Strategies that work. Virtual field trips utilize interactive websites, multimedia resources, live feed web cameras, and even classroom visitors and experts to deliver an immersive experience for students that is second only to a real visit to the location. Google Expeditions is a virtual reality teaching tool. You can swim with sharks, visit outer space, walk through a museum, and more without leaving the classroom. There are close to 500 expeditions available and more in development. Science and social studies can be truly augmented with trips to the bottom of the ocean or the steps of Machu Picchu. Learners will be mesmerized by the immersive nature of these virtual reality tours. Voki is an educational tool that allows users to create their own talking character known as an avatar. Voki characters can be customized to look like historical figures, cartoons, animals, and even yourself. Give your Voki a voice by recording with a microphone, using a dial-in number, or uploading an audio file. Voki characters can be emailed, shared on social media, and embedded on websites. There is also Telegami for the iPad that creates a similar avatar as Voki. EarthCam provides thousands of live web camera feeds from hundreds of locations around the globe. Digital learners prefer learning that is simultaneously relevant, active, instantly useful, and fun. Many educators still feel compelled to teach memorization of the traditional content-based materials set in the curriculum guide in order to prepare students for the tests their students regularly have to face. I believe that this is happening at the expense of cultivating the higher order thinking skills, teaching the new and different 21st century skills these students will need once they leave school. The digital generation is frequently criticized, derided, misunderstood, misrepresented, and disrespected in the press. They're often accused of being intellectual slackers and antisocial beings who lack even basic social skills. The research says that, on the contrary, for the vast majority, the digital world is far from an isolating experience. Outside of school, they're immersed in a participatory culture based on building relationships that allows them to interact not only with their classmates, but also with people who are not geographically close. The digital generation is constantly in contact with one another, as 4,000 plus text messages a month would seem to indicate. They play World of Warcraft, they play Mass Effect, they play Halo, they play Angry Birds, they play hundreds of other games that are exciting and engaging, and they use digital tools to constantly stay connected to everything and everyone. And in these virtual environments, they create and control everything: their users, their active, their excitement, novelty, risk, the company of peers. It's somewhere they can turn for advice and information. They observe, they inquire, they participate, discuss, argue, play, critique, and investigate. Video games engage kids in ways that are relevant to their lives, allowing them to learn by doing as they experiment with new social and cultural worlds. As a result, they become easily frustrated because many of them have a digital life outside of school and a non digital life in school. Increasingly, this generation expects, in fact demands, to be able to be in control. The problem is that what they expect and experience in their world outside of school with their games and texting and websites is often completely at odds with what they experience in the classroom. So after spending hundreds of hours of their lives wandering around in virtual environments, they come to school. And when they come to school, where almost everything is controlled by adults, they're compelled to sit in classrooms where things are hierarchical and unidirectional, where the teacher stands at the front of the room talking to them nonstop without even showing nice pictures. They control nothing. They have to sit there passively and listen. For them, school is all about being passive observers and learning endless deferred gratification. I can absolutely guarantee you that it will not be possible much longer to engage young people in an educational system where the quality of experiences the school provides aren't as inviting and engaging as the quality of the experiences they can get outside the school. You're not going to like what I'm going to say, but for education to survive, education and learning needs to become as engaging and fun as video games, as their lives are outside of schools. The classroom is not enough for them. Our challenge is to keep up with them. This is because the digital generation will never accept the traditional stand and deliver educational model. They need to be in a situation where they're controlling things, and that can never happen in the current school environment. Why is it that our young kids all across America can solve the most complex problems in a video game involving executive decision making and analytical thinking, yet we accept the fact that they can't add or read? Right beneath our personal radar, digital learners are very much an intellectual, problem-solving, thoughtful, and highly social generation. They have highly developed critical thinking, problem-solving, and social skills. The problem is that their social skills and their problem-solving skills are just not the skills that the older generation values, nor are these the skills that we typically test for in schools today. So, their extraordinary cognitive and technical abilities are often not acknowledged or dismissed by the older generations. In fact, there are some experts from the older generations who argue that the experiences the digital generations are having and the skills they're developing are worthless, time wasting, and irrelevant. That play and games are simply preparation for work and life after school. It's taken me years to realize, but what I now understand is that for today's digital generation, play is work, and work is increasingly seen in terms of games and gameplay. That's why the digital generation wants their learning to be relevant and instantly useful. But beyond this, more than anything else, When it comes to learning, the digital generation want to know the answer to one simple question. Why in the world am I learning what you're teaching me? And what possible connection does this have to me and my world? And for the digital generation, the correct answer is not because it might be on the test or needed to pass the course. That's just not enough of a reason for them. Because of digital bombardment, the younger generation's brains have been completely saturated with information and digital technology. So their brains are physically different than ours. As a result, they think differently and they process information differently, using different parts of their brain differently than people of our generations do. And it does not stop there. People 2, 3, or 4 years apart are having completely different experiences with technology. We are beginning to see accelerated gaps between the younger generations, between the brains of screenagers and tweenagers and younger children. It's an everyday part of their lives. This generation learned to type before they learned to write, and they use a keyboard more than they use a pen. Anyone who has seen a 2-year-old playing around with an iPad knows what I'm talking about. Technology is not new if you were born into it. And remember that iPad is the most primitive technology they will ever use. How pervasive is the digital landscape? Today, 70% of children between the ages of 2 and 5 can operate a computer mouse, but only 11% of them can tie their own shoes. Now, there's much more I'd like to say, but I hope this brief presentation explains, at least in part, why kids act differently, why they behave the way they do, why they respond to the world the way they do, on the way they learn, how they view the world, and what interests and engages them. And I hope this might help explain, at least in part, some of the fundamental differences between their generations and ours. New technology has changed everything. It's a great challenge unlearning being a traditional teacher. What's the definition of insanity? It's doing things the same way we've always done, but expecting or wanting or needing completely different results. But if we continue to do what we've always done, we will continue to get what we've always got. And in doing so, we will absolutely fail our children and fail this nation. And I know. I hear teachers and parents complain all the time about how different kids are and how differently they learn. And then in the same breath, we continue to teach and test them the way we always have. I hear all the time that kids today can't concentrate the same way we can, and that there are kids today who can't even memorize the names of the states and their capitals. But these same kids are thinking to themselves, why in the world do I have to remember this when I can just Google or Siri the answers in 3 seconds on my cell phone? Meanwhile, many teachers are saying, what's a Siri? And these same kids who seem incapable of remembering the names of the states and the capital can instantly and with enthusiasm tell you the lyrics of 1,000 songs or the attributes of 100 game characters. Our students are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being bombarded with information and having their attention drawn by every platform, from computer and smartphones and tablets and advertising and hundreds of television channels and the internet. And then they're getting penalized for getting distracted. Distracted from what? From stuff they consider boring at school for the most part. It seems to me that it's no coincidence that the incidence of ADD and ADHD has risen, and in parallel with the rise of standardized testing. These kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs to get them focused and calm them down. From my research and writing and conversations with the digital generations, I can assure you that the vast majority of them are not disabled. They're just different. They're just not interested, and they just have no patience for old ways of teaching and learning that we do. So increasingly, they're shutting us out. Is this really a surprise? Blaming them for acting the way they do is like blaming a bank for being robbed. If you make students do hour after hour of low-grade clerical work, don't be surprised if they start to fidget. They are not, for the most part, suffering from psychological problems. They're suffering from childhood. The digital generation are experiencing a world that is increasingly, some would say, completely out of sync with our traditional instructional approaches. Many children do not learn the way teachers want to teach. Now, in closing, let me be clear. There absolutely is a place for traditional teaching and learning. The problem is that many educators, many decision makers just don't get it or aren't willing to acknowledge that there's a widening gap between the world and schools. Schools are changing. The school is changing many times faster. In this changing world, the role of a teacher is not just to stand up in front of a class and show the students how smart they are. It is to prepare students to learn without us, to help our students understand how smart they all can become. To be an effective 21st century teacher, we must first possess the very same 21st century skills that our students are expected to have. And in addition to those skills, we must be able to help all of our students obtain and develop 21st century skills. Look, I've spent many years in the classroom. Anybody who knows anything about anything knows that the secret to success in the classroom has very little to do with being a good disciplinarian or classroom manager, and everything to do with creating an engaging methodology that compels students to want to be there. It's not about making students learn, it's about getting them to want to learn. Without motivation, there will be no learning. Ask yourself this question: would students be in your classroom if they didn't have to be there? Education in the 21st century needs to be about full body learning. The killer app and best one-to-one device for 21st century learning is a good teacher, a teacher with a love of learning, an appreciation of the aesthetic, the esoteric, the ethical, the moral, a teacher who understands Bloom's, Gardner, and Piaget, who knows how different kids learn at different times at different rates. Today's learners are not the same learners that schools were originally designed for. Today's learners are certainly not the learners that many of today's educators were trained to teach. Beyond this, it's crazy to think that more than a decade on in the 21st century, we're still debating what 21st century learning looks like. Education continues to operate on assumptions about teaching, learning, and assessment that are targeted at students from another age that has passed us by. As a result, when I travel from school to school, I increasingly become concerned that we are trying to fit square peg students into round hole schools and round peg students into square peg schools. And increasingly, we're depending on standardized tests and college entry exams to measure increasingly non-standardized brains. Now, let me be clear. It's not about throwing out traditional approaches. There's absolutely is a place for traditional teaching, learning, and assessment. There absolutely is a place for basic skills and memorization. There absolutely is a place for the tried and true for traditional education. That's how you transmit culture. That's how you transmit democracy from one generation to the next. Educators have every right to expect our students to respect and honor our traditions. Make sure you heard me say that. But at the same time, we have to understand that the world has fundamentally changed in the past 20 years, and it continues to change at a faster and faster rate. So in the same way that we have every right to expect the digital generation to respect, understand, and engage with our world and our values, we absolutely also need to take the time and effort to respect, understand, and engage with their world and their values. Just because we were here first doesn't mean we can ignore their world. It doesn't mean that our ways are better. And believe me, we ignore their world at our peril. What we desperately need is balance between our world and theirs, between traditional and digital learning environments. The fundamental question you need to be asking is how have you modified your instructional assumptions and practices to address the fact that kids have fundamentally changed and continue to change? There's nothing stopping us from changing the way we learn and how we teach. But if you or your colleagues haven't changed markedly in the past 10 years, you and they are just not meeting the needs of your students. And yes, I understand that change is hard, but they are worth it. Strategies that work. What if you allotted 20% of your instructional time to have students explore topics, interests, and passions of their own choosing? With guidance from teachers, they can connect the projects and learning experiences explored during the 20% to the curriculum. Also known as 20% time or genius hour, this approach puts learners in the driver's seat. Using digital games in the classroom puts the power of learning in the hands of students and promotes a student-centered approach to teaching, learning, and assessment. Digital games compels teachers to step out of the spotlight and become facilitators of learning, rather than the gatekeepers of all information. Students today prefer not to be lectured at. They want to receive information from multiple sources and like to generate their own knowledge from the readily available resources, both digital and traditional, that are all around them. The critical step in using digital gaming in the classroom is to identify an appropriate game that aligns well with the concepts to be explored as outlined in the curriculum. The experiences become more meaningful as the students create the learning and assume ownership of the newly acquired knowledge. This approach will prove to be a significant change for many educators, as it is a paradigm shift from the traditional approaches to skills and learning they have been using in the classroom on a daily basis. Picking their product is an approach that allows students the opportunity to select the form of their final product. Although the teacher maintains all the same expectations for each potential product, students are left with the freedom to select the medium the product will be displayed in. If a class has just completed a unit on exploring westward expansion, then students have the choice of creating a poster, producing a movie, designing or creating a product, recording a podcast, participating in a debate, acting in a play, shooting a commercial, or implementing a student presentation. Role play is a powerful and versatile active learning strategy for learners of all ages. It is a natural vehicle for learning and provides an authentic method for students to demonstrate their understanding of content while also engaging the participants and observers in speaking, presenting, and listening. Teachers provide real-world scenarios or prompts that students use to underpin their academic focus, facilitate project planning and preparation, and evaluate performances. As a form of simulated learning, role-playing is a highly adaptable approach that fits into most content subjects and grade levels. As a method to demonstrate higher-order thinking skills, role-playing is also a great way to encourage students to socialize and work collaboratively in a team. In his book Last Child in the Woods, children's advocate Richard Louv shared his groundbreaking research identifying the important connection between humans and nature. He concluded that exposure to nature is essential for healthy childhood development and for the physical and emotional health of children and adults alike. He also linked the lack of nature in the lives of today's wired generation, what he called its nature deficit, to some of the most disturbing childhood trends, such as the rise in obesity, attention disorders, and depression. Some simple and pragmatic instructional strategies and programs that increase the amount of time outside, but which are still connected to curricular content areas include creating a butterfly or herb garden, school grounds cleanup day, developing a wetland, creating a composting station, participating in a nature walk and recording the experience in a science journal, outdoor reading time, or participating in outdoor learning games.